Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with California State Senator Monique Limón, who is the only legislator, I should point out, who was on the Forbes Future of Work list. Senator Limón, how are you?
Good. How are you, Diane? Great to see you again.
Great to see you. And the reason we're talking about the reason that actually got you onto this list, which was you were behind this transformative pay transparency, Pay Equity Act that became a law earlier this year. And now you've got this Pay Equity Pledge. Let's start with how you're seeing, now that this is the law of California, how has it been playing out?
Well, look, this has been the law in California since January 1st of 2023, and it is the Pay Transparency for Pay Equity Act. And we're really proud that we were able to get the governor's signature, but certainly also very happy with what we're seeing just in the first 8 months that this law has been implemented. And some of what we're seeing is really some real effects, I think, for employees who are applying to jobs. To be able to see that salary range has made quite a difference in terms of where they're applying, how they're applying, and also their ability to negotiate from early on in the process and not have to wait later on in the process. So we're very happy with that. The reporting piece that is in the law, that comes next.
Right.
And so we're still in the early phases, but I think it's been something that overall has been very positive for employees. And I'm hearing from employees across the country and employers who are saying, once California put this into law, they're also putting it into law in other places, but also just following the practice. Sometimes it's one or two states that may put something into law, but the practice then becomes more of a national practice. And so I think we're starting to see more of that.
Well, and I should have pointed out, it is one of the most expansive in terms of the reporting. But I guess what's interesting here in New York, and I've seen this in other parts of the country, is those ranges are pretty wide. You could drive a truck through some of those ranges, like anywhere from 100,000 to 180, from 40,000. So is that gaming the system, or is that recognizing that, there could and perhaps should be a wide range for some roles?
Well, I will say that I think it's doing both. I think that there are, some entities that are trying to game the system. Certainly, we saw ranges from 100,000 to 900,000, and we think that's probably not in the spirit of the law.
900,000, boy, sign me up for that one.
But there's also others where the range really is a $40,000, $50,000, $80,000 spread, depending on experience, depending on years, of education, and all of that is very appropriate to take into consideration. So we are seeing both. I think we are really focused right now on just making sure that the law itself is in place, that our state agencies that are getting ready to collect the data, because they do so on a periodic basis, will have the capacity to start collecting this data and start looking at it and reflecting an aggregate summary of what we're seeing on an annual basis. So those are really the two pieces, but I would say that it was also expected that we would have these broad ranges for some, and that we would have some folks that were trying to game the system. That's nothing new. In this legislative process, we see that. But I will say that a bulk of the employers that do business with California are really moving forward, following the spirit of the law. I have, I've heard some people, I would say that December of 2022, right before the law went into place, I heard from a lot of HR folks that were in the midst of trying to, really do the work to figure out what that range looked like. And so it was really a busy time. Now it's the law. Now it's in practice. People are breathing slightly different than they were before the law went into place, and we're excited about what we're seeing.
Before we get to the pledge, we spoke about this before. You always think about some of the unintended consequences, too, of these legislations. I know in the past people have talked about pay suppression being one of the risks where overall pay perhaps goes down. Is there any unintended consequence that you're at least keeping on your radar right now? Because, again, how something is executed and how it's intended is very different at times.
Absolutely. And I think that the reporting will be helpful for us to look at it. One of the things that we are aware of is that for some companies, they said, look, if I have to advertise a salary range, I'm going to try to do it on the lower end as opposed to the higher end. But I think the one piece of that's also not within, for example, fully within the legislature's control is the picture of what is happening at the local, regional, state, and national level. We did not expect that in 2023, we would still be talking about the need to increase and boost up our labor force. And so this is one element that was not in the calculation, that employers would still be saying, I need more employees. I need more employees. I'm looking for employees. So it turns out that that particular limitation that the bill could have had is now being balanced with the fact that at the, every level we have sectors that are still in need of employees, and they cannot afford to, both financially or from a human, perspective, they cannot afford to lowball employees
to get people in,
right, that you just can't do that. You're
if you say 40,000, some places you've lost them at hello. Well, there's been a lot made of movements, labor movements around the country in this sense. I think false sense. There's not a mass exodus from California, but certainly, a bit of a migration, and people like to sometimes attribute that to a number of factors: cost of living, regulatory environment. I'm curious from where you sit, and again, you are one very important part of the puzzle, but just one part. What do you see going on in terms of the attractiveness of the labor market, Senator Limón, compared to other parts of the country?
Look, I will tell you that we look at both as representatives of districts. We look at both what's happening in the district at the micro level, at the city level, at the county level, but also as a representative of the state of California. I have the ability to look at the micro and the macro. And what I can tell you that despite what, kind of what some folks are saying is an exodus, it doesn't parallel with the fact that California is on its way to become the fourth largest economy of the world. And so you have, both things that are, are part of what we assess. When you look at our per capita numbers, we're very consistent with other states. Yes, we are a big state. So when you look at just raw numbers that aren't taken into context of population or per capita or compared to other states, I think that it looks slightly different. We have a better sense of the picture once we look at the fact that other states are also losing folks, right? Other states that may not have our laws in place. And certainly part of what's driving the high cost of living is a high demand to live in California. You have these elements that are, I say, very often as a legislator, we work with a multitude of contradictions that are all true. Right. And you have to try to understand how to grapple with them. And so these are compelling interests. But I am very proud that this state is, well on its way. We've been an economic engine for the globe, not just for the country. And I think that continues to be one of the realities. And we keep focused. I think despite the narrative that might be out there, we really do keep focused. And we think about not just the employees, but also the employers that are in our state and what it looks like. And I'm proud that we've made some incredible investments in different sectors. And that's what has allowed us to compete with the globe.
And, you talk about this multitude of complex factors. One of the things that I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, because you are a strong advocate for pay equity, and there's a pay equity pledge on right now, we've also had this complexity around the Supreme Court decisions with affirmative action and what else is going on in the country. How does that play into what you're seeing on the ground? Are you concerned? Because when we look at pay equity, it's not just what you're paid, it's obviously the conditions into which you're come into the workforce and training and everything else. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, California is in an interesting place when it comes to affirmative
Right.
action, because affirmative action was first banned by the regents, the
University of
University of California,
California.
right?
Yep.
University of California regents, and then it was statewide. And so I have quite a bit of experience in this space, simply because a lot of the work that I did at the university was trying to understand how we create an undergraduate or graduate, sector in our state of California that's competitive but also diverse. So I think what you will see in California, and we are seeing it now, we have a lot of other states coming to California and asking us, how does California do it? And so one of the things that I think happened when we lost affirmative action in the state of California, decades ago, is that we really unpacked what that meant, what that box meant when you checked off, I am a woman. And so, as when you look at that, you also look at the fact that there are other elements that, California and other states still look at. We look at, for example, diverse experiences, and that includes, are you the first in your family to go to college? Did you grow up in a, family that received, state aid? You look at some of the zip codes, and you look at, like, is this a zip code where they have a lower than college average going rate? Like, there's so many elements that we have been able to look at. And so I think that California, regrettably, has been in this situation for a couple decades. It's not a Supreme Court decision, I think, that feels good or is what we think is in the right direction. However, we are leading in this space because we know how to continue to do this work, both at the employer sector, but also the education sector and so many others, to be able to recruit the most diverse, excellent individuals into our workforce, into, our education system. So I think that we are in a unique place, but we are ready to keep doing that work and working with other states who are asking themselves.
Yeah, well, there's certainly been a lot of attention.
Everybody has an opportunity.
The University of California system certainly has gotten a lot of attention for that reason. Let's talk about the pay equity pledge. I think of those terms, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, which is never always, can make the mind, the soul sore. It can make people think government is the problem. I think this is very powerful legislation that has come out. Now you have this pay equity pledge, and talk about why would you need that, and how does that augment, what's now essentially the law of the land in California, at least, from a reporting and a transparency point of view?
So our commitment to pay equity, I think, is such that we know that there are, legislative, efforts to try to get folks to kind of course correct and ensure that, the workforce is diverse, that the workforce is competitive, that the workforce is equitable. But there's also non-legislative tools. And so Truziak came to us to try to do this.
Talk about the role of this pay equity pledge in all this, and why do we need one? Is it more transparency?
I think an equity pledge is also about increasing the effort, right? There's the legislative effort, but there's also the private sector effort that comes from the private sector saying, I want to sign up, let's do this, and I'd like to take a pledge, and I'd like to be public about my company's pledge to do the right thing and make sure that we have pay transparency. And so Truziak came to us also because they have, they're very interested in doing this, and they have the incredible and amazing Megan Rapinoe working with them as well. And so she has
U.S.
been
soccer player, yeah.
U.S. soccer player, yes, U.S. soccer player who I think so many of us know well, and she's been leading the effort in her space, right, in her sector, as a global competitive athlete. And so this is something that we thought would be an incredible opportunity to say, look, whether you're coming from the private sector or whether you're coming from government, we would love to join and give the companies credit and say, here are the companies in the states, in the country, who have said, I am in. We want to have pay equity, and we are committed to doing that. And so that is what the pledge is, and we're very excited that we were able to launch that, just a matter of a few weeks ago.
Let me bring it back a little bit to a more personal perspective as to how to think about this, because there is this tendency when I talk to business leaders of, you recognize excellence in a form that reminds you of yourself. And when you talk about things like pay equity and legislation, they always take umbrage a little bit that they want to have equity, they want to promote women. There's a pipeline issue. There's all kinds of other issues that are stopping them from getting, gender pay equity at least. What do you see, and give us some thoughts yourself as to how you respond to that, because these are very personal issues as well. Relationships between a boss and an employee, can't legislate that.
Right. And I think that is a great point, that we cannot legislate everything. So what we have legislated is addressing one piece of this overall puzzle, right? And that piece has to do with the salary ranges as well as data collection. And I think that it's also important to recognize, and I've talked about this often, that our law, Senate Bill 1162, that passed in California in 2020, is not going to fix the problem. It will not eliminate the gap. It will narrow it. And as we all move forward, whether it's the private sector doing individual pledges to say, this is what we want for our employees, whether it's legislation, or whether there are more intentional, everyday practice and trainings and models within each sector of private and public. This is also applies to public employers as well. I think there's a lot more work to be done. So I think that it's a recognition that what we are doing narrows the pay equity gap, but also a recognition that these elements alone are not going to solve for all of the issues that come in play. And we want to also be helpful in that space. And I think we haven't seen as much in terms of laws or directions, but we have seen that whether it's, women on corporate boards or pay transparency or paid family leave, when these laws go into place, they have an intended and perhaps unintended consequence, but the intended, consequence that was expected is something that we see. And now it's our opportunity with the data collection to assess whether we've been fully successful, partially successfully, or if we need to go back and revamp the laws. And that is something that happens very regularly in the legislative process. We will go a few years and say, look, do we need a course correct? And what does that look like? And so I think having a law in place allows us to course correct. Not having a law in place doesn't allow us to do any of the above.
Well, look forward to getting more data and look forward to continuing the conversation. Senator Monique Limón, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Diane.